From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Democrats are getting a case of the jitters as they look at President Biden's polling numbers and start to worry he may not be the best ticket to ride in the 2024 election. But can they or will they do something about it? Or are they counting on Donald Trump to save the day for the Democrats one more time? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, here with the Wall Street Journal Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with my colleagues Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. The anxiety is almost palpable among Democrats about Joe Biden, at least if you judge by the questions that have been popping up in the media, press, and some highly frightened columnists we've been reading. And the latest cause is the WSJ poll from 2 weeks ago that showed the president's approval rating at 42%. But much worse, 73% of the public in that survey think he's too old to run for office again. Of course, he's 80 years old now. He will be 81 in November and 82 by the time he would take office for a second term if he wins. Let's listen to the president on his Asian trip over the weekend to the G20 in India and elsewhere. Answer a question about Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Nobody likes having celebrated international meetings if you don't know what you want at the meeting, if you don't have a game plan. He may have a game plan. He just hasn't shared it with me. But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
Well, a trip to the G20 is a long one. It's a grueling trip halfway around the world and no doubt tiring. But I have to say that comments by the president, Kim, aren't going to help with the American people's view that maybe the president is a little too old for the job.
The president's job is grueling. That's the whole point. And if you aren't up for the grueling, if you aren't up for the 3 o'clock call, as it were, then you're not going to inspire a lot of confidence. And I think that goes back to an overriding issue, which is that 73% number you said of people in the Wall Street Journal poll who said he was too old to seek a second term. Notably was the contrast there. Even though Donald Trump is only a few years younger than Joe Biden, only 47% of those thought that Trump was too old to seek office again, which goes to show that it isn't just about a number, which is what the White House says all the time. It's not about the number. It's instead about the performance, which is clearly in decline. And I think a lot of people are very concerned it could decline even more rapidly. And yet, here's the thing that's most interesting to me, Paul, is that for all the anonymous quotes we have about this and the media hand-wringing, which is clearly based on anonymous quotes from Democrats, really nobody is publicly on the Democratic side saying anything about this, other than, like, for instance, Minnesota Representative Dean Phillips, who's been quite vocal, but he is a one-man band. Everybody else, they're fretting about it quietly, but nobody will stand up and say what needs to be said.
That is for sure. Dean Phillips is a vox clamantis in deserto, as we used to say at Dartmouth, voice crying in the wilderness. Donald Trump, for the record, is 77, would be 78 if he wins and would take office. In my view, he looks older than he did the first time around in 2016. I don't think there's any question about that. I watched a little bit of him in South Dakota speaking at a rally on C-SPAN over the weekend. He does look older, but so much more vigorous than Biden. What do you make of this omerta, vow of silence that Kim talked about among the Democrats?
Well, I think it's destructive to the Democratic Party's chances in 2024. And part of it is just party loyalty and the sense that Biden is inevitable, I think. He's an incumbent. He's the guy who beat President Trump last time. And so I do think that there's a worry that any dissents only weaken that effort the second time rather than getting somebody else in. But I would point to a recent CNN poll that does a series of head-to-head matchups between Joe Biden and Republicans running in 2024. And the only guy that Biden beats in these polls is Vivek Ramaswamy, 46 to 45. He's tied head-to-head with Ron DeSantis, 47 to 47. But he loses to the rest. He loses to Nikki Haley by 6 points, to Mike Pence by 2, to Tim Scott by 2, to Chris Christie by 2, and to Donald Trump by 1 point, 46 Joe Biden, Donald Trump 47. And that, I think, has to be pretty alarming. If you're sitting in the Democratic National Committee, if you're one of these donors, these power brokers, I think you have to see a poll like that and be worried, what have we gotten ourselves into? But the challenge is that no one can take Biden out of this race. He would have to come to the conclusion to take himself out of the race. And he seems uninclined to do that. This is a job that he has wanted for 40 or maybe 50 years. And finally, he's got it. You know, being in the Oval Office, having a staff beats retirement. I think that's true for even some of these members of Congress. Nancy Pelosi last week said she's running for office at 83. I think these people just get used to having a staff and don't want to go back to being just regular old Joe sitting on your porch.
Well, no doubt that may be true, but there's a little bit more at stake than having a staff and having a Green One commuter pass to Wilmington as opposed to having to take the Amtrak from D.C. I mean, you have to think about things that are bigger. And as you look, Kim, and I think Joe Biden would be thinking about things that are bigger. I mean, I think he's enough of a patriot to feel that if in his own mind he couldn't do the job, he wouldn't do it. Or at least I like to think so. It's not just the age issue that has Democrats concerned. There's several other things like the Hunter Biden insight we've been getting into the family business and what that might portend, what we might learn about Joe Biden's involvement in that, if anything. There's Kamala Harris as VP, and I want to listen to her talk about this. But there's a whole series of things that are anxiety producing for the Democrats.
Just one more thing on the age, which I think ought to put this in perspective. Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are older than Bill Clinton, who was president when I was in college, okay? And I'm really old, so that just should say something about the problem we have at the moment. But, I mean, you're right, Paul. It doesn't stop at the age. There is Kamala Harris, who has just had a horrible 3 years in office. She was largely chosen to satisfy an identity politics demand within the party. She has certainly not helped the president and has really lessened confidence in him, too, for his reelection because of the fear that she would accede to the top. There are the Hunter Biden problems. There's the economy, which, while it has proved pretty resilient this year. We're looking at strong third quarter growth. Most economists think a slowdown is coming. There's possibility that unemployment could rise, kicking up that misery index, the combination of inflation and unemployment. There's the ongoing border disaster. That Wall Street Journal poll, by the way, rated Biden approval on a variety of different issues. I would note that there was not one in which he broke 50%. Most of them were in the 30s, the economy 37%, inflation 34%, his handling of China 34%, but absolutely at the lowest was the border, in which he had only 30% approval, because these days even Democrats are beginning to push back. Folks like New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who many mayors around the country are dealing with this influx of illegal immigrants, running out of places to shelter them and out of money to feed them. And there's no assistance from the White House and no efforts that anyone can see to try to stem that flow. So there's a huge number of issues in addition to his age.
Let's listen to Kamala Harris answer a question about the president's fitness and her own prospects.
Do you think he's ready to serve as president until he's 86?
First of all, let me say that our president has been an extraordinary leader who has accomplished things that previous presidents hoped and dreamed and promised they would do and did not achieve. So yes, I see him every day. A substantial amount of time we spend together is in the Oval Office, where I see how his ability to understand issues and weave through complex issues in a way that no one else can to make smart and important decisions on behalf of the American people have played out. And so I will say to you that I think the American people ultimately want to know that their president delivers and Joe Biden delivers.
Questions about the president's age often go hand in hand with questions about how you would step in the role, if necessary. Do you feel prepared for that possibility? And serving as vice president prepared you for that job?
Yes.
And how would you, describe that process?
Well, first of all, I'm answering your hypothetical, but Joe Biden's going to be fine, so that is not going to come to fruition. But let us also understand that every vice president understands that when they take the oath, that they must be very clear about the responsibility they may have to take over the job of being president. I am no different.
Kyle, Kim was talking about Kamala Harris and how she's perceived. I don't know that that kind of riff, if you had to listen to that, would be reassuring to a lot of people about the prospects of if she were to be the president of the United States. Or for that matter, I think if President Biden decided to not run, she would obviously jump into the race right away. She would have a head start as vice president. But a lot of Democrats are very nervous about her leading the ticket if it came to that. And that's one of the reasons that they're hanging with Joe, because they figure that if he steps back and she did get the nomination, it might be worse.
I don't think that kind of just pure assertion is reassuring to voters. And I think this is the other element of the challenge that President Biden has, is he knows that if he stepped out, that Kamala Harris would be the top of the heap for the Democratic nomination. I tend to think that she would not be unopposed and there would be a real primary, but part of this depends on when Biden comes to this decision. If he comes to it in the middle of the primaries after he already has collected some delegates, boy, it is very difficult to stand up that kind of a campaign. I mean, that may be part of what Governor Gavin Newsom has been quietly trying to do on the outside, raise his own profile in case something like that happens. But the other thing that I think is notable in the polling and we're thinking about is President Biden's decision to run, I think, is part of what is motivating Republicans to potentially renominate President Trump, because we have these two candidates, neither of which is broadly liked by the public. You look at polls that say most Americans want both of these guys to go off into retirement. But if you ask Republican primary voters, are you worried about the electability of President Trump? They say no, because he's going to be facing an 80, 81, 82, 83-year-old Joe Biden. I forget what exactly he's going to be on Election Day 2024, but they think that President Trump doesn't have an electability problem. And so it's kind of a fascinating dynamic that President Biden's willingness to stay in this race is part of what's motivating what he says he's trying to stop, which is to block President Trump.